Welcome, I'm Steve Barg, City Administrator for the City of Marshfield, and this is another edition of the Post-Council Meeting News Conference. We do this after every meeting of the Common Council to give you an update on what was discussed, what some of the decisions were that were made, and what it means to you. I'm joined today by Mike Warren from representing Hub City Times. Mike, good to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Thanks for having me here.
You're very
Appreciate
welcome. And I will turn it over to you for the Q&A here.
All right. Well, it was another, I don't know if eventful is the right word,
A little bit.
council meeting. And again, you never know based on the agenda, right? This is one of those agendas where you look at it and you go, pretty straightforward. However, an hour and 42 minutes later, here we are. So I'll begin at the beginning. There is something that is called the consent agenda, right. And that sort of basically takes all of the minutes of the meetings that happened since the last council meeting and kind of puts them all together.
Correct.
And it kind of says, here's what the committees have done since we last met, and now usually they just approve them all with one motion, correct?
Correct.
Okay. There was some discussion on one of those issues. I think it had to do with an item on finance and budget from August 2nd?
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Yeah, about a month ago, the council voted to have us take down the signs at the entrances to City Hall. The signs that say no firearms or weapons allowed. A lot of debate about that. You've been covering this over the years. We went through it in 2019. We went through it again in 2021. Third time around, it got passed by a vote of, I think it was 6-4. So we did take the signs down. Well, that allowed the public to come in, citizens, consultants and others who come to our building and be carrying, firearms, concealed carry, whatever. But we looked back after that meeting and saw that the personnel policy prohibited employees and actually prohibited council members from carrying them to meetings as well. So at that point we thought, wait a minute, if the public can come in and they can be carrying, it ought to be fair for employees and people who are in the building to defend themselves if there were an incident of sorts. But we had to look at modifying the personnel policy. Well, I talked with our new HR director, Sarah Dressel. We're very happy to have Sarah on board. And she looked it up, policy 3.390, it's called Zero Tolerance for Workplace Violence. And we tried to figure out what needed to be modified, and we thought that the only thing that needed to be modified was taking out that reference to not being able to possess weapons, employees in the building, and council members for that matter. Well, at the meeting, and he talked to me before the meeting actually, Nick Paschal said, you know what, you may be creating a void there. You just take out the language that refers to weapons and whatever. Is the whole idea of protecting the safety and security of the workforce still there? So let's say you now allow, guns. Can somebody just set a gun in the middle of the conference room table and say, well, I'll be back in an hour, I've got to go somewhere else? What about negligent acts? What about other types of concerning behavior in terms of where these weapons are kept and how people behave? So he suggested that we do a review of that policy before we just go ahead and adopt it. So they talked about it at some length, and I think they voted maybe 6-2 or something to send that back to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee for more work. So it probably won't be until September, Mike, when you'll see it again, but at that point we'll come forward with something that hopefully addresses the concerns that were raised. It shows that even now allowing weapons in the building, that we're not compromising unduly the safety of those who are in the building during the day.
Okay, so I want to clarify that because I, as a citizen, could come to a council meeting now and carry concealed.
Correct.
If I'm an elected member of the Common Council, I could go to the same meeting and I'm not allowed to carry concealed. Yeah. Correct? Correct.
And that's one of the reasons I think we kind of thought we want to get that changed because you don't want it to be one-sided. And I think the people who voted to send it back to the committee, at least some of them feel the same way. Some don't, because the vote to remove the signs was divided. But I think the supporters who wanted to send it back to the committee said, yeah, let's make sure that we've dotted all our I's and crossed our T's instead of just taking out the reference to weapons. Is everything else in the policy doing what we can to protect the employees and others?
And in the meantime, Monday through Friday, during regular business hours, the employees, again, also cannot carry concealed into the workplace.
Right now?
Right.
Correct. And that will likely go through sometime in September because we only have one more Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee meeting this month, and it's coming up next week, and we're not ready to propose anything. So I know that sounds kind of awkward. I feel a little bit awkward about it, but I get the concern. I respect Nick greatly. I think Natasha Tompkins weighed in on it too and kind of agreed with Nick that we want to make sure that let's get the full policy right. And we really haven't looked at the policy since 2011. That was the last time that policy was updated. So it probably deserves a review anyway.
Well, and Alderman Witzel, I think, made the point during the council meeting. He said, okay, if we're going to change this and we're going to look at it, let's put everything on the table.
Yeah.
Let's look at, and I kind of chuckled when he mentioned the list, but you don't think about these things. Nunchucks,
Yeah.
box cutters, all these things. He mentioned, if we're not just talking about guns here, we're talking about blades, knives, all an assortment of things that could be construed as a quote-unquote weapon.
True. And I think that our HR director, Sarah, and I really felt like the heart of protecting our employees, the heart of saying that we have a zero tolerance for any kind of threatening behavior is still there. But, I get the concerns that were raised the other night, and we'll take another look at it and bring back something in September.
Okay. All right. Moving on to the I guess you could say regular agenda, even though the consent agenda is part of the regular agenda. But again, they can kind of change that a little by pulling things off and talking separately about it. So going on to the regular agenda, there was a presentation of the 2021 City Financial Audit Report. And I didn't catch it all. I caught most of it. And I guess the gist of it was that, we're in pretty good shape, all things considered, or was it kind of a review of, I think it was a review of where we ended up at the end of 21, right?
Right. It's really a look at where December 31st, 2021 was. You look at, and whatever's happened since then is now new, but it's a snapshot of 2021. And it was a good report, all things considered. I think we had a good year. Really, and I was going to talk about this in another item if we talk about the borrowing, but we went to Moody's, and Moody's is a tough audience. We got dropped 3 years ago, Mike, from AA3 to A1. I always laugh because when you say we have an A1 bond rating, that sounds like it's the best you can get, right? Yeah. It's not the best you can get. There's other categories ahead of that. We got dropped from AA3 to A1, but then the next year they came along, and they were so concerned about where we were headed that they actually put us on a negative outlook, they call it. And that means that they're basically telling people who bid on our bonds and look at our finances that they think if we went anywhere from A1, it would be more likely to go down rather than up. Well, in the last 2 years, we've taken some good strides. The council has worked with us. We've made some changes. We had a tax rate increase. It was a little bit hard for people to take maybe, but that helped too. But we've now gotten to the point where we were talking to Moody's a couple weeks ago, and we've gotten them to lift it. So the borrowing we just did shows us with an A1 rating. We still want to get back to AA3. But getting that negative outlook off of there was a good step for people who bid on our bonds to say, okay, at least we know that we've stopped the bleeding and we're going the other direction, hopefully. And we are. All the statistics point to the fact that we're in better shape than we were in 2019, definitely.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too far into the weeds here on this, but I'm remembering the discussion, and I remember seeing. I always try to look at the columns. They have the different columns and different categories, general fund and all these things, and then bottom line. Yeah. Did I see? I know I remember seeing a deficit of $8 million plus somewhere, but then later on, I think that was I forget the gentleman's name from
John Troutman.
Yes, who did the presentation. And he highlighted another column that had like a nearly 2.7 million negative balance in one of the other columns, and I took that to mean what? Do we have like a structural deficit right now?
I'm forgetting what columns those were.
I am too. I know one was in the general fund. It was an $8 million figure, and then I think on the far right, where they kind of reconcile everything and boil it down. I thought I saw something that had like a 2.6 something million negative balance, and I took that to mean. Is that the bottom line? Yeah, I'd probably not, but
I'll take this conversation and go back and take a look at it. Yeah. The figure that I focus on, and I know that Moody's focused on a lot, is 3 years ago, Mike, our balance, our I'll call it a savings account. It's not really a savings account, but our unrestricted general fund balance. How would we deal with a crisis? Do we have money in the bank? Was it 9%? 9% of our annual operating expenses. In the last 3 years, we built it up from 9% to 20%. Now, the auditor wants us to be between 25 and 30. So our general fund reserves, unrestricted, are still not where they want it, but 20% looks a lot better than 9%. And I think that's a big part of the reason why Moody's has taken off the negative outlook, because they see that we're building up our reserves again in a way that gives them more comfort about what would happen if we had, well, COVID. I mean, we got through that. That didn't hurt us too bad. But if we had something else that was really going to hurt our finances, there's a cushion to begin with. 9% is not much of a cushion.
Correct. Yeah, especially considering something we're going to talk about coming up here.
Correct.
Another shortfall in money.
Right.
But okay, so there is not probably a structural. I probably heard it wrong because that term structural deficit, it kind of raises a red flag. People hear that term and go, "Oh boy, they're not managing their money right," or they, another, ambulance type thing that we had to correct here a year or so ago.
Yeah,
it's nothing like that. Okay.
No.
All right. Well, then let's go on to another item having to do with money. Resolution awarding the sale of almost $4.3 million in general obligation corporate purpose bonds. Put that into English for us. And what that means.
Really, this is our annual borrowing we do typically in the summer for street and major facility projects. Typically, street improvements might make up about 75% of it. Then you get the odds and ends with maybe some work to a building, a few other things. We help with projects for UW. We partner with the county on helping some capital projects. The remaining 25% roughly is odds and ends. But we're borrowing about $4.3 million. Actually, it's a little bit less than that. And this is where that bond rating came in. And again, we don't know the impact for sure of that removal of the negative outlook, but I think our financial advisor, Dave Ferris from Ellers, believes it was helpful. We got 4 bidders. They were good bids. The little bid was like 3 point something percent. Now, a couple of years ago, 3% would have looked horrible. We did a borrowing a while back, and it was like 1 point something. But in this moment in time, with the way the interest rates have been going up, you've probably been following some of this too in the news, a little over 3% was a good rate. And saved us a lot of interest over what we thought we would have to pay based upon that. I understand the negative outlook was a help. So we're feeling good about it. These are for projects that are happening this year. It makes people wonder, wait a minute, now you started the project without having the money? Well, we could always pay for it with our reserves, but we know we're going to borrow for it. So oftentimes, just like, for example, East 17th Street over by the fairgrounds. That project started a couple months ago. This money is being used for that. But we know that we're going to do it. We know the borrowing's coming, and that will cover. We've paid contractors, but it'll be backfilling with this money.
Okay. All right, and so that was approved.
Correct.
Yeah, and so
Correct.
that moves forward. All right, so let's go to the next item, which was a request to authorize staff to contract for a compensation market update. So this basically looks at what employees, city employees, are getting paid.
Correct.
And
Correct.
Maybe how that compares to municipalities of comparable size or something. I know there's an issue. They're looking at this as coming up because there's this issue. I forget what the term is. It compression?
Yeah.
Correct. Okay, where the rank and file are getting pretty close in some cases to making what the management teams are making. And so if I can make that much without the headaches of being a manager, why would I bother?
You nailed it. And typically this is in public safety more than other departments, especially fire. They've had problems trying to incentivize people to apply for deputy chief in these positions because, look, if I'm only making a few $1,000s less, why do I want the headaches? Why do I want to go to meetings and be involved in all these things that are going to burn me out? And so I'll just stay a firefighter and make close to what the management are making. Here's the way it went down. I mean, we did a survey or a study with McGrath out of Northern Illinois. They were our consultant in 2017. And it got approved in early 2018. And at that time, McGrath said to us, hey, look, you're going to want to look in 5 years at doing sort of an update of this. It won't be a full-blown new study. We're not going to charge you for doing an entirely new review. We think that the pay grades and the way we did this is good, but the market will be changing. What an accountant makes in 2018 compared to 2023, you may want to adjust. You may be falling behind, or maybe you're paying more than others are. That seems unlikely, but who knows? So we were going to look at doing this in 2023, Mike, but then with the pay compression thing, we said, why don't we move it up a year? And let's ask them as part of the study to look at that piece. So the estimate they gave us to do this was $26,000. $16,000 and change was for the base plan that we always expected to do, where we got an update on all these positions and whether or not we're really in the right ballpark for what they ought to be paid. The other 9,000 plus is a deeper dive, which is in part looking at compression. And how can we deal with this? It's really hard. The fire and police departments, for example, they contract. So we have to sign a contract with them. Well, what if we sign them a contract for them for 3% increase in their pay? Because that's what they're getting paid in Rapids and Point. And then our own employees get an increase of 2%. You know, it's very challenging because there's a lot of components to go into it, and it can get pretty narrow. So we decided as one of the ideas on how to address the pay compression topic, the first step would be to try and get this market study going earlier. Let's do that a year earlier. Let's see what a fire chief or a police chief or a deputy chief makes in other cities. And then that'll be a way we can determine if we're at the right spot for those positions, and then we can better compare to the represented employees, the rank and file as you called them.
Right.
And so we brought that to the council back in June, and the council said, you know what, let's put a hold on that idea. We don't have an HR director. I'd like that person when he or she comes on board to be up to speed on this, and bring it back in late summer. And I did that, and I'm not criticizing the council. They have to make their decisions on the best use of resources, but they weren't favorable. And a few of the things they brought up, one of them was, do we get enough private data? You know, you want to know what an accountant makes here compared to an accountant in Stevens Point or Wisconsin Rapids or Wausau. That's fine. What's an accountant make at one of our companies down the street here? That's really our competitor in many cases. And I know that our consulting firm, McGrath, has said that's data that's hard to get. We can get it at a global level. We can find out that accountants in, you know, the north half of Wisconsin are making this. But if you're really looking to compare with the business down the block, which I think you are, we can call them. They're not going to tell us. They have no incentive to tell us. They're letting out information that their competitors might find out. They got other things to do other than fill out our forms, you know, that we want to know what everybody makes there. So they said, look, basically it's going to be other municipalities in your area. And I know at least a couple of members of the council think that that's not going to really be a good study. If we don't get some private data, that's not a good study. There were other concerns too about whether or not this is going to make a good impact on us. There's probably underlying concerns about if we find out that people ought to be making more, can we afford it? Let's say that Steve Barg and Mike Warren are sitting there going, you know what, we just found out that we're a little under, so how soon does a new, you know, I get that concern, I get it. But at some level, you have to find out if what we're paying is still commensurate with other employers 5 years later. And I'd like to see them allow us to look at it again maybe in 2023, but for the moment, they voted not to do that, and that's certainly their prerogative.
Okay, so that did not pass.
It did not. I forget the vote. It was divided.
Yeah. Because I know two members were missing.
Two members were missing,
correct?
yeah.
So I think it was probably a...
I don't remember what it was. It might have been 6-2 or something.
Yeah, I think something like that.
But again, I have total respect for those who voted against it. I'm not saying anything negative. Now we have to talk about what we do next with respect to the pay compression, since that was really going to be our starting point. But we'll deal with it and we'll go from there.
Yeah, I think because one of the concerns, I think it was Alderman Witzel brought up, that we are, you know, he wanted the private sector data, and he said it was, you know, you can go on the internet and go to Indeed and all these places that are hiring, and you can see what they're offering for certain positions. You know, like he said, an accountant is an accountant, or a construction worker could be a street department worker for the city. You know, and I think his concern is maybe a valid one because the city has been losing some people. To the private sector, and it's just happened with 2, I think, department heads in the last year or something, right? So,
yeah, it has.
So
it has.
It's not something that may happen or that we should look at just because. I think he wanted it to be looked at because it has happened recently.
It's a valid point, and I will go back and get that data. I'll at least talk to McGrath about, you know, can we get that data, even as we're not moving forward with the study right now. We may move forward in 2013, and at least Tom and probably others would like to see that private data.
Right.
I just wanted them to know the limit as to which private data can be provided, because I would like to think we could call, you know, in town, call the major employers here and say, what do you pay? That just wouldn't lead to the outcome that one might think.
Yeah, but what'd you pay our guy? You took away our guy.
Yeah, true.
And what got him away from us? What did you give him that, you know? And we're not going to use it against you. We're just going to try to do better here. I don't know if they would do that or not, or, you know, something like that.
A lot of private employers try to keep that stuff pretty tight to the vest.
Right.
In fact, even in private employment, if they give, let's say you and I work for the same company and they gave you a raise, they would probably tell you not to tell anybody.
Yeah.
Don't tell Steve and those other people in your department when you're making, we gave you a good bump. Where in City Hall, it's basically a fishbowl. I mean, they can call today and right while I'm sitting here with you, they could call and say, "What's Steve Barg making?"
Right.
Someone's telling them it's open season.
Well, and it's public.
It's public knowledge, public dollars.
Public data.
Dollars. Yep.
Public, you can
It is.
ask, and you should be able to get that information if you really want.
So we'll set this one on the shelf. I'll
Okay.
tell you that I expect to look at bringing it back next year, and not to irritate the council. I don't get any points for it. In fact, I lose points for that. If you're a council person right now seeing me, my goal is not to irritate you.
Yeah.
But at that point, it may be worth talking again.
Yeah.
And at some point, when you do a pay study, it does fall out of I was going to say compliance. That's the wrong word, but it's no longer reflective of the market. So, we'll see where it goes.
Okay. All right. And then speaking of hiring firms to do things, there was they talked about putting together a team to review, because we were talking about finance stuff here,
Yep,
audits
yep.
earlier. Now they're going to put a team together to find somebody to do the next audit for the city, or what exactly was that agenda item?
Yeah, back in May, we did this with our banking services. We've been with Citizen State Bank of Loyal for a number of years, and we actually did an RFP, and we moved to Forward Bank. This is the same kind of thing. We've had CLA. In fact, you saw the auditor there. We talked about John Troutman. We've had them for 9 years. We did a 5-year contract with them back in 2013, and then we re-upped twice for 2-year periods. So now after 9 years, the city and utilities is part of this too, Marshall Utilities, we decided it might be time to see who else is out there. So we brought this to the council and to the Utilities Commission, and we agreed. So we've done an RFP, and in fact, they actually blessed it earlier in the meeting under consent agenda. But what's going to happen now when we get proposals, Mike, let's say we get 5 proposals, we need someone to go through those and kind of evaluate them and decide which one looks the best to us. We may do interviews, we may not, but ultimately some group has to come up with a recommendation back to the Finance, Budget, and Personnel Committee. So I put together a group, it's not on your agenda here, but 7 people. It would be our Finance Director, Jennifer Selensky, our Accounting Manager underneath Jennifer is Jordan Munger. By the way, those are 2 wonderful employees that are fairly new and just doing a great job in our finances. And then 2 council members or the mayor and 1 council member, I asked them to pick, and then 3 representatives that the Utilities Commission can pick themselves. So the council then voted for Ed Wagner and Pete Hendler. They will be the 2 people on this committee from the council, and this team will again go through whatever proposals we get. I think it's going to be sometime around Labor Day, and we'll see what they come up with. And we'll be picking somebody for another. I think we're looking at another 5-year contract to start, and maybe extensions after that. So this is nothing against CLA, but it's good business practice to look and see who's out there. What do they charge? What do they do? And get some references.
Yeah, and it may be CLA again.
It may be CLA again.
You just
yeah,
don't know. Okay.
We have no predisposition on that one.
Okay.
But it's good practice. Like I said, you've seen it in auditing, you've seen it in banking. You'll see it soon on labor law. We've used Von Briesen for a long, long time, and we're looking for proposals from other labor law firms. Again, good business practice.
Yep. Okay. All right. There were some closed session items on the agenda, and I'll just kind of do what I normally do and say, because it's in closed session for a reason. You can't say too much.
Right.
But what can you tell us about the agenda items that were on the closed session for Tuesday?
Yeah, there were 2 of them, both in our TIF districts, one in TIF District 10. It's the mall project, and believe me, there's a lot of buzz about the mall projects. I hear about it from family and friends and whatever, but looking at bringing some new retailers to the community. The city's been having an ongoing dialogue with the developer. I think we're close to an agreement, trying to nail down the final version of that. Hopeful that we'll get it done during the month of August here. The developer definitely wants to move forward with the construction work necessary in the fall, and get things going to bring those retailers here. You can imagine when you're talking about an agreement of that size that a few meetings is not uncommon. Our attorney drafts something, they send it to their attorney, they come back and say, we like this, we don't like this. That's kind of where we are, but I think that it's very possible. In fact, I think it's more than possible that in the next 3 or 4 weeks we'll be able to wrap this up.
Okay. And then anything else on, I think it was one other one, right?
Yeah, TIF District 13, that's where we're trying to get an agreement for 55 new single-family lots. with a developer down there at 21st and Washington in the southeast part of town. That one's moving along too. It's a little bit trickier because what's going on in the market. Mortgage rates are increasing. Some of the supply chain things that are affecting home construction and stuff. But we're still hopeful that maybe we'll be able to come up with something there that can advance housing. We've been criticized for a long time for not having enough lots. Daniel's edition is 23 single-family lots. But if we're able to do this one, it will be a big boost to that. If we're not, we're not. I got to tell you that when I go to these meetings in closed session, our council is very, very prudent. They're very much looking at whether or not we're going to be able to recoup our investment, which is exactly what they should do. So whether this one comes to pass or not, I'm not sure.
Okay. Now, I did skip one because I wanted to come back to it here at the end because it's probably going to be a little involved, and it brings a couple of different things together into one discussion. We kind of touched on it earlier when I was talking about, is there a structural deficit, and do we have enough money in the sort of rainy day fund to take care of things like what may be under this agenda item? It said, proposal for special council meeting. It was presented by Alderman Ed Wagner. And it had to do with, there was a recent, joint meeting of the Common Council and the Police and Fire Commission. And they were talking about, I'm not exactly sure what. Maybe you can summarize for us, because there is this, I think it's $615,000 is the number.
Right.
And there's this issue, this discrepancy on some kind of deficit or something. And where did it come from? Nobody seems to know how it happened, where it came from, who's responsible, what led to this, whose oversight should this have been? Was it a council thing? Was it a police and fire thing? And it was sort of one of those weird meetings where everyone just sort of sat there and kind of looked at each other suspiciously.
Yeah.
And with not a lot of real, open discussion. I don't know. Maybe maybe Alderman Wagner was asking for this meeting because, and then that was part of the discussion, whether it's going to be open or closed session.
Right.
Because how comfortable do people feel saying certain things in open session when really that's probably what needs to happen? So there's a lot at play here. Can you sort of unravel this ball of twine for us and where we go from here?
I will. Back in 2016, Mike, we I think the word is outsourced that most people use, our collection and billing for EMS, for ambulance. And so we did that for a variety of reasons, because there's a company called LifeQuest in Wautoma that does it for many communities across the state. They're very effective. They're very efficient. Somewhere in the transition, then they were doing it, and they notify us regularly how much they billed, how much they've collected, and they're active in terms of trying to collect with any way they can. They use various collection means to try and collect every penny that they can. But somewhere along the line, as some of these accounts continued and weren't paid, because oftentimes Medicare and Medicaid, we get what we get. You can keep pursuing them that they don't have money, so it's a moot point. They were showing as still being receivables on our balance sheet. And they are, but the likelihood of collecting on them begins to drop off after a while. If you're a Medicare patient and you've Medicare paid a portion of the bill, not that much, and you had a supplemental plan and they paid a little bit more, but there's this leftover balance. Mike Warren's at home going, I don't have the resources to pay this. We're still showing it for quite a while as being something we expect to collect. So one of the things that wasn't happening is we really weren't assessing the likelihood of collecting some of these after 2-3 years kind of thing. But along with that, there's some other challenges. First of all, Medicare and Medicaid are not even closely keeping up with the cost of ambulance. Every year we increase the ambulance rates. We can increase them 5%, 7%, whatever. 70% of our customers we get what we get. The government says, here's what you get, and you're basically done. So that disparity continues to grow, and it's happening all over Wisconsin. It's happening all over the country.
Yeah, it's sort of like what's happening with education funding in the state.
Yeah,
this 2/3 thing, which doesn't even come close to to 2/3. But anyway,
think about another business where you walked in and that you said, well, that product is $100, and I said, well, I'm going to give you $30, and then when do I get the rest?
Well, we don't know. Yeah, you may not get it.
For me, you're just getting 30. If you can find it from somewhere else, good luck.
Gotcha.
But there's some other things that are going on. We have been for the last few years believing that we were in better shape, not recognizing this issue with the accounts receivable that were unlikely to be corrected. We've been, and I think rightfully for the info that we had, we've been assessing or allocating some administrative overhead expenses from City Hall to the EMS. Now remember, we call EMS and wastewater enterprise funds. AKA businesses. So, our previous finance director came to me and said, Steve, you spend time on behalf of EMS, I do, other finance staff do. We ought to be charging at least something against them for the fact that we do work for them. If they were a business, they'd have to pay for these services. The HR director, they need HR services. So we started allocating charges against them. Well, in retrospect now, when you realize that the balance sheet really shouldn't have been quite as good as it was, we probably shouldn't have been doing that. So that helped drive us a little bit farther down as well. And now we just have to figure out how to get out of it. It's not a panic. We're not in disastrous straits, but we do have a real challenge in terms of, in this environment, with the disparity between what Medicare and Medicaid pay and what we collect, and with some of the increasing costs that are going along as well. It costs more to buy ambulances, it costs more to do everything. How do we get on good, sustainable ground for the long haul? And that's what this conversation needs to be about.
Yeah, and it seemed to, so in listening to the dialogue at that joint meeting, it seemed to be, and I didn't hear all of it, but I got to hear most of it, and it seemed to be I don't want to say elected, I guess some are elected, some are appointed to these, to fire and police.
Oh, yeah.
And then elected council members.
Yep.
And some of them, and then outside of that are the city employees.
Right.
Both from, City Hall and from the EMS side, the fire personnel, EMS people.
Right.
But within the elected and appointed bodies, it seemed to be, one side was, well, we didn't do it, don't look at us.
Yeah.
We didn't. And the other side saying, well, we were told this was none of our business, don't look at us. And so I think there was some of that, like, I don't know, if they weren't necessarily trying to play the blame game, they were trying to, okay, what exactly got us here and where do we go from here? How do we solve this and how do we keep it from happening again? But there was some sort of, there was a little tension.
Yeah, there is. And you see this at the federal and state level too, finger pointing. And I'm not saying that that's what was happening, but you could say, well, why didn't the auditor pick up on this? Well, why didn't LifeQuest, our billing and collection for ambulance, why didn't they pick up? Why didn't city staff? Where was the fire department? Where was the finance department? Where was I? And those are good questions. What did the PFC know? What did the council know? What should they have known? And I think we need to debrief, but at the end of the day, we need to figure out how to move forward.
Yeah.
The fact that we weren't allocating money for bad debts based upon the expectation some people wouldn't pay, that was a mistake. Whether we thought LifeQuest was doing it, whether they thought we were doing it, at this moment we just need to move on, and we'll do that. We've already started, moving on toward discounting the expectation that at a certain point we're not going to probably collect all the money on some of these accounts. We need solutions at this point, and I think what Ed Wagner is doing by trying to call the council together, apart from staff, apart from the PFC, is say, look, we need to weigh in just us. We got a lot of things involved. Do we want to continue to run an ambulance service long haul? If so, what do we need to do to straighten it out? I think they know that ultimately staff needs to be in the room. I mean, people with the numbers, people with the, but for right now, they want to, at least some of them want to have a conversation by themselves. And that's certainly their purview.
Did they decide? I didn't get to stick around for the end of that discussion. Did they decide whether it was going to? I mean, do we have a when and where? And is it going to be open or closed? Or they just sort of left it?
Those are left hanging.
Open-ended yet here.
Council President Wagner is talking with the city attorney about the open-closed thing.
Okay.
And I think he'll be feeling up members to see when they might be available. I presume it's going to be a special meeting away from a regular council meeting. Whether it will be open or closed, it's up to whether or not you can legally go into closed session. You know as well as I do, is it litigation? Is it negotiating contracts? Is it a personnel? You have to have a statutory reason to get there. So.
Yeah, and with the issue here is that some of these personnel matters, some of these issues, right, you could come up.
Yeah.
In a discussion like this, right? I mean, without it being the center of discussion. It's not we're talking about Steve Barg's performance review or his salary or whatever, but it may come up in terms of how we got this deficit here. Yeah. So is that open? Is it closed? I mean, right? There are some of these gray areas that they might get into.
Yeah, you start talking about people by name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think another thing, just to throw it out there, the contracts we have with the clinic for these transport services. I think that isn't the reason why we're in this I mean, we can look back and maybe we ought to be charging a little bit more. We're talking about negotiating the next contract with them. But really, all these things come into the mix. It's a complex matter, and I think that we just need to come up with a model that says, how will we put ourselves on sustainable footing? Do we need to cut expenses a little bit? Do we need the general fund to commit a little bit of money? Right now, it's all outside of the general fund. Do we need to, obviously we need to discount the accounts that we don't expect people to pay fully. It's a multifaceted thing. There's no silver bullet to get us on the right track, but we're going to get there. I mean, there's other operations doing this across the state, and we're all struggling with the same thing because of Medicare, Medicaid reimbursement rates.
Right. Even during that joint meeting, I think it was Fire Chief Fletty who said, here are the issues. I recommend this. I think it was TOMA model or something.
Yeah, TOMA.
And here's another issue, and here's what Department B does.
Beloit,
was it Beloit? Yep. And I recommend their model for that part of it. So it was sort of like, grabbing, this piece and sort of making your own.
Yeah, you try not to reinvent the wheel.
Right.
I mean, you try that in all your life, but certainly in government we want to be learning from others. I encourage anybody listening to this right now to know that, again, this is not a crisis. It's not a great place to be.
Right.
I mean, it's very uncomfortable. I don't want to minimize it. It's a problem, but it's one we'll, I think, find a way through with the creativity of our staff, elected officials, PFC, whoever needs to be part of this. But it did throw us for a pretty significant loop when our finance staff realized that, really those assets on the balance sheet maybe needed to be discounted quite a bit, and that was how we got to the point where they're overstated, and therefore there really is a shortfall of sorts.
Yeah. You got to stop changing finance directors. Every time you do, you find a shortfall of some kind, right?
Yeah. Well, again, I got to credit Jennifer and Jordan for their work on this, along with the fire. The fire and EMS staff has been great. They've been meeting with us. They've been saying, "Hey, look, we didn't know this. What do we need to do? Tell us what we need to do, and we'll work on it."
Right.
Everybody's going into problem-solving mode, I think.
Well, and you could say, and like you said before, why didn't Steve Barg, notice this, or why didn't? Is it your job to, know everything? Maybe at the end of the day, but it's a good example of, look, we have department heads for a reason. Because, you're not micromanaging necessarily. You're not, right? You sort of try to, keep an eye on everything, but you're the general manager of the team. You're not the head coach. So, you're not doing moves on the field or calling plays. You're just kind of generally running the, team from a high level. You're not micromanaging every move they make on the field, so to speak. Right?
Well, no, that's true. I mean, I've kicked myself a little bit on this, but the likelihood of me intimately knowing the status of ambulance accounts, I mean, that's not normally a level I go to.
Okay.
But again, I choose. I'm not blaming anybody for how we got here. I don't think that's going to help us, and I think it's just a matter of the fact that maybe somebody thought someone was doing it and somebody else thought they were doing it. Whatever. But again, we've caught it early enough to where we can find a way out of this. We just need a good model. And TOMA and Beloit and others have things that we've looked at. We need to find what's best for the city of Marshfield.
Okay. So maybe one of those things where, I don't know, two guys are going fishing and, they get out there in the boat and one guy says, okay, did you bring the worms?
Yeah.
No, I didn't bring the worms. I thought you were bringing the worms. I don't know. Maybe it's something as easy as that, right? I thought you were accounting for this money. No, I thought you were.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now we got to figure out how we're going to do this moving forward.
Yep.
Is it that simple? I don't know.
And anytime you're in a business, I can't think of another one like this, where 70% of the people that are your customers are in a category where they're being funded by federal and state monies, and the federal and state monies don't come anywhere near the total cost of the service. I'm not trying to cry, and do sour grapes here, but that does make it a challenging business model to work with. But we'll work with it. We have intelligent people on the council. We have intelligent people on our staff, and PFC as well. We'll get it done. Ultimately,
the bottom line, somebody's got to get that number, that 615 back to zero. Right? Is that the bottom line here?
And I think that's part one. Part two is then the long-term sustainable model.
Yeah.
What 2025, 2030, 2035, what is the model that's going to be able to account for the fact that really the collections from many of our accounts are never going to be near 100%? And what does that look like? And it's going to involve probably a number of things. Like I said, it could involve budget issues that we look at in terms of expenses, other revenues that we can bring into the mix, whatever it is. We've got to adapt to the fact that that's not going to change. We're not going to hear that there's a new law passed in Congress tomorrow that says that they're going to fully fund all these services where 100% of the ambulance bills are going to be paid for by Medicare. That's not going to happen. So learn to work with what we have and make it work.
So as we often say at the end of this program, Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. This is really definitely a stay tuned thing.
Yeah.
And even at this point, staff is going to stay tuned because there's obviously going to be a meeting of the council without us. They've asked that staff not be there, whether it's open or closed. And they're going to look at some of the issues from their perspective and say, where do we want to take this? And then, we'll bring staff in, but what do we see the playing field look like? And we'll go from
They're
there.
going to have a players-only meeting without the coaches.
Yeah.
When they have those kind of things, right? Like, they've started the season 0-5. And okay, let's throw the coaches and managers out. It's just players only. It's a gut check time, right? Are we going to step up? How are we going to fix this? What's going to be our role, right? And then, they come out and, I don't know, usually more unified and more focused on what need the job at hand or something.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. And at the very least, they're going to debrief about that 3-hour meeting and really be trying to come down to their own common themes. Do more than half of us believe that we need to look at this? Do more than half of us believe that we need to look at that? Okay. And then get the people that they pay, us, to with the financial information and whatnot, to get back in the world with them and try to figure it out.
Okay.
But like I said, I'm going to say it for the last time today before we start winding down. We're going to get through this. There's going to be some pain. There's going to be some challenges, but we're going to get through this.
Okay. All right. Well, like we said, stay tuned. Thanks,
all right.
Steve. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. A pleasure having you here from Hub City Times. As always, we really appreciate that. And on behalf of city staff, the council, and everyone at the City of Marshfield, I want to thank you for tuning in. That wraps up this edition of the Post-Council Meeting News Conference. And again, we do this every 2 weeks after our council meetings. Thank you for watching and have a great day.